Imagine having the power to impact our future, tackling major issues we face today: political coup, climate change, the fight against a global pandemic. In the midst of it all, will you watch from the sidelines, or will you take the lead? Do you have the passion, the perseverance, and a strong sense of critical thinking? Taylor's University offers Southeast Asia's first work-based learning international relations degree, where in your third year, you will work, learn, and be mentored by game changers in the industry. Diplomats, foreign officials, leaders from international organizations, and top scholars coming together as part of this hands-on, industry-based education, led by Malaysia's most influential, trailblazing leaders. The world is in need of visionary leaders now more than ever. Social leaders who will pioneer change. Be the next global leader now.
Do you want to be an agent of social change, tackling issues like poverty, inequality, mental health, to be remembered as the protector of the most vulnerable? Fulfill your calling to be a prominent advocate, or simply work behind the scenes? As long as you are creating a better future for generations to come. To deal with the root causes of society's problem, you must first prepare yourself. We can help you get there. As the #1 private university in Malaysia, Taylor's University is offering Asia's pioneering degree in social innovation and change. Get involved. Spark your leadership instincts with the Emerging Leaders Greenhouse program, where you can shadow and learn from prominent national leaders, both on and off campus. Learn how we partner with leading social organizations to drive change in the society. Great leaders set out to make a difference. Lead the change you want to see in the world. Welcome everyone. Good evening, Salam Sejahtera. I'm Anas. Welcome again to our Malaysian Politics and Public Issues series. This is the 7th series, and today we're going to talk about the Malaysian Parliamentary democracy. I will quickly go into my slides. We are honored to have Professor Shad Salim Faruqi with us. Today, again, we're going to listen to his wisdom. But quickly, why are we here? To educate, discuss, and promote the exchange of ideas about Malaysian politics and public issues in a mature, rational, and justly balanced way. Now, this is the 7th of the series. As you can see, that we have gone through many interesting topics, from the Malaysian Constitution to Rukun Negara. The last time with Prof. Shad is Islam and the Malaysian Constitution. Today, the 7th, the Malaysian Parliamentary democracy. A little bit about Prof. Shad. Emeritus Professor Dato' Shad Salim Faruqi is a Malaysian legal scholar and professor of law, and is currently holding the Tunku Abdul Rahman Chair as Professor of Constitutional Law at the University of Malaya. He is also the 4th holder of the Noah Foundation, Tun Hussein On Chair in International Studies at the Institute of Strategic and International Studies, ISIS Malaysia, effective June 2019 to June 2021. He has served in University Technology Mara in Shah Alam in various capacities as head of the Diploma in Law program, Assistant Rector, Assistant Vice Chancellor, and Legal Advisor. Presently, he also writes a FORTNIGHLY column reflecting on the law of the Star. Prof, over to you. I think many has been waiting to listen to this very interesting topic, the Malaysian parliamentary democracy.
Thank you so much, Anas. Good evening to all of you. Ni hao, wanakam, namaste, sat sri akal, kopi wosian. Apa khabar kita? Now, before I begin on my topic on parliamentary government in Malaysia, let me just alert you all that my topic is not about democracy in Malaysia per se. That's too huge a topic that would take one into areas of human rights and elections and independence of judiciary and rule of law. I'm talking about parliamentary democracy in Malaysia as it contrasts with presidential democracy in the USA, or what is called the Westminster system versus the Washington system, or the system of responsible government versus the system of independent government. I fully acknowledge that between my topic and the topic of democracy in general, there will be lots of overlap, but nevertheless, there are some differences, but you can ask other questions during the question and answer session. May I go to slide number 1? I wish to begin by pointing out that when Malaysia's constitution was being drafted, there was a choice of two contrasting models of government, both very much admired: the American system of independent government and the British system of responsible government, often referred to as the Westminster model. Why Westminster? Because Parliament building is in the Palace of Westminster. The two systems differ with each other on a large number of scores, and that's what I wish to do now. Slide number 3. In the United States, the executive and the legislature is called the Congress, are institutionally separated, totally separated. Members of one branch are not allowed to be part of another branch. The US president and his cabinet are not and cannot be part of the American Congress. The US government is separate from and independent of the legislature. The legislature cannot dismiss the president or his cabinet. The president and his advisors do not participate in congressional debates. Next one. In the British system, also applicable in Malaysia, on the other hand, there is no strict separation between the political executive and the legislature. I add the word political executive because executive consists of the civil service, the police, the army, and many other agencies. The political executive and the legislature are actually conjoined. The government is an integral part of Parliament and is required to be answerable to the representatives of the people. This is Article 43, Clause 2, that the PM must belong to the lower house and the other ministers can belong to either house. The motive force of our constitution is in a conjunction and not in a separation of the executive and the legislature. Now I come to the issue of check and balance. However, in both systems, whether the British system or the American system, the government is so organized that the powers of one organ are supposed to check and balance the powers of the other. So power must check power. That's the ideal. For example, appointments by the US president are subject to ratification by the Senate. Now that's beautiful. The president can choose, but the Senate has to ratify those appointments. The legislative power of the Congress can be checked by the president through a veto. He can say no. However, if he says no, the Congress can override the president's veto by 2/3 majority in both houses. Though the president's cabinet ministers do not sit in Congress, and they cannot. However, conventionally, they appear before congressional committees upstairs to explain policies and programs. And actually, scholars in the UK look with envy at the way the inquisitorial committees of the US make ministers answerable to the Congress to supply information, justify policies. You know, the press is present. The committee members are present with their legislative assistants, with their legal advisors. And it's incredible how searching the questioning of the ministers is in congressional committee work, committee meetings. Next one. That was check and balance. Sorry, I have to mention the Malaysian situation. In Malaysia, the government is required by Article 43, Clause 3 to be collectively responsible to Parliament, to answer questions, to justify policies, to supply information during debates and the daily question and answer session. If the PM loses his majority in the lower house, he and his cabinet must resign or advise dissolution under Article 43, Clause 4. Next. Elected parliaments. In both the USA and Malaysia, popularly elected assemblies exist at both the federal and state levels. At the federal level, the parliament or the Congress are bicameral, 2 chambers. The state assemblies are unicameral, only 1 chamber. In both countries, the constitution mandates periodic elections. In Malaysia, it's 5 years. The US is more complicated. 1/3 of the Congress goes into election every 2 years. And there is universal adult suffrage or right to vote. What is adult is a matter of difference of opinion. In Malaysia, it is still 21. I'm sorry to report, some of us are under the impression that it's reduced to 18. Yes, Parliament did amend the Constitution to that effect, but sadly, the amendment has not yet been in the relevant sections. The relevant sections have not yet been notified in the Gazette. So the election eligibility, the voting eligibility age is still 18. Now, understandably, in Malaysia, because the Dewan Rakyat is elected and the Dewan Negara is not, the Dewan Rakyat has preponderance over the Dewan Negara. This is unlike the USA, where the Senate is very powerful, very, very powerful. Even though the Senate has only 100 members, 2 from each of the 50 states, and the House of Rep, I think, has 435, still they have equal power. The Malaysian Senate is mostly appointed. It was not always like that. But at the moment now, it has 44 appointed senators and 26 indirectly elected senators, 2 from each state, indirectly elected by the 13 state assemblies. Next slide. Regrettably, we have no local authority elections, though these did exist in the earlier years of independence till 1960. In Malaysia, the constitution and laws provide the main electoral principles. This is a very huge topic, Anas, and this requires a separate treatment altogether. We have a single member constituency system as opposed to a multi-member constituency system. So 222 MPs, 222 constituencies. But this is not a universal rule. In some countries, each constituency may have 10 MPs. Every citizen of age 21 who has registered as a voter in a constituency is eligible to vote unless he or she suffers from an electoral disqualification as provided by the laws. Next one. The right to seek elected office, the right to get elected, is also provided in the Constitution, and I'm happy to report that there is no racial or religious or gender or educational or income criteria applicable. You know, many people say, oh, those who seek to vote must have some minimum educational qualification. Now, that would mean that the poor, the uneducated, the marginalized sections of society will not be able to participate. So that's not right. There should be no discrimination. Victory in a constituency is on a simple plurality vote, and there is no proportional representation. This is a very unsavory aspect of our electoral system. So if, let us say, there were 3 candidates in a constituency, one got 40% of the vote, the second got 39% of the vote, and the third got 19% of the vote. The fellow with 40 can beat his chest and say, I am the Wakil Rayat. Actually, 60% voted against him. If there were proportional representation, more than one MP from the same constituency, then what would have happened is that the votes, there are complex rules about that. 40-40 would definitely equal to 1 vote, and the 20% will get 1 vote. So if there were 3 seats, each of them would be able to carry 1. That would be much more representative or proportional. Another very good aspect about our legal system is there are no reserved seats for the army, for the police, or for any race or religion in the elected House of Rep. You know, in some countries, I don't want to name them, they may get offended. In some countries, 25% of the seats are reserved for members of the armed forces. A unique feature of the electoral landscape in Malaysia is that rural constituencies may have less than half of the population of urban constituencies. At one time, the law was they can have less than 15, they can have 15% or less. But then the constitution was amended. Now it is less than half. And the constitution doesn't say how much lesser. Okay, next slide. That's a very important difference between us and the American system. Security of tenure versus the possibility of a vote of no confidence. In America, the president has security of tenure. He is there for 4 years. He may be a Republican. Congress may be controlled by Democrats. Doesn't matter. Republican president can run the country even though the legislature is belonging to a different party. The president cannot be removed from office on a vote of no confidence. The only way he can be dismissed is by impeachment plus conviction. Many people misunderstand. They say, oh, impeachment alone. No, impeachment plus conviction. Impeachment in the lower house, conviction by a 2/3 majority in the upper house. From 1787 until today, no president has ever been convicted and removed through this process. Andrew Jackson was impeached in 1868, but escaped conviction in the Senate by 1 vote. Impeachment proceedings were aborted, were started for Richard Nixon, for William Clinton, and for Trump, but they did not go very far. They did not reach the Senate. Okay, next slide. In Malaysia, on the other hand, Article 43, Clause 4 permits the Dewan Rakyat to dismiss the Prime Minister and his government by a vote of no confidence. And may I point out, this vote of no confidence can actually occur in a number of ways. One could be in a clear-cut vote of no confidence. The other could be defeat on the budget. A third could be defeat on the motion of thanks to the royal speech at the beginning of a session. There are other ways also. If there is a defeat on a major bill, that could be regarded as a vote of no confidence. But the Constitution is not explicit, and therefore some conventions, British conventions, apply. At the federal level, no Prime Minister has ever been voted out of office. The 2 Prime Ministers, Tun Mahathir 2020 and Tan Sri Mahyuddin Yassin 2021, resigned due to loss of support, either in their own party or coalition or from the MPs. Next one. At the state level, however, there have been several cases of chief ministers having to resign. Kalong Ningkan in 1966 in Sarawak, Dato Haji Harun Idris in Selangor 76, Dato Haji Nasir in Kelantan 77, Nizar in Perak in 2009, Tan Sri Musa Aman in Sabah 2018, and YB Faisal in Perak in 2020. They were the victims of loss of confidence in their own state assemblies. A PM or chief minister's majority may also disappear if his supporters cross the floor to join the opposition. This is what happened to Tun Mahathir in 2020, Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin in 2021, where a certain number of MPs from UMNO walked out on him. Dato Pairin Kitingan in Sabah, he won the election hands down within a few weeks. I think within 14 days or so, a large number of his PBS legislators walked out on him. Then Dato Sri Haji Nizar, 3 of his supporters walked out, and Tan Sri Musa Aman in 2018 in Sabah. Next. Anti-hopping, defection, flow crossing laws. Party hopping and no confidence votes cause the rise and fall of governments and produce much instability in parliamentary governments. For presidential governments, this is not a problem at all. You can walk out as much as you like. The president is secure in his office. Now, this party hopping, no confidence votes, they make a mockery of general election results. The nation goes into election, nearly 500 million ringgit was spent at the last election. A government is elected, but after a while, there is party hopping, the government falls. There is obviously encouragement to political corruption and patronage politics. There is a crisis of trust because of this way some MPs, may I call it, they play tang-tang. They are here, this moment they are another place, the other moment. It's hopscotch, they are playing hopscotch all the time. So there's a crisis of trust. The prestige of parliament, the prestige of MPs is at the lowest point in our history. No wonder 41 out of 193 countries in the world have some type of anti-defection laws. Foremost examples, I should not say foremost, but some of the examples in our neighborhood, though I have given a few other examples: India, Bangladesh, Fiji, Nepal, Singapore, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and then farther west, Israel, Portugal, Bulgaria, Hungary, Ghana, and Mexico. Next slide. The problem is that anti-defection laws pose some constitutional difficulties. First of all, what is it that is crossing the floor? How do we define crossing the floor? If I belong to party X, but on a particular bill, I vote against the bill, have I crossed the floor? Have I defected? Am I totally bound by the directive of the leaders to support every bill? Can't I express my disgust or my passion or preference for some policy measures? So what is crossing the floor? What if you speak against your party on the floor of the House? What if you vote against a bill supported by your party, or you don't follow the party directive? Of course, if you resign from the party, that is crossing the floor, but there are other problems. There is also a constitutional right to association. In Article 10, Clause 1C, Clause 1, Subclause C of the Federal Constitution, there is a constitutional right to association. The right to association includes the right to disassociate and to reassociate. So anti-defection laws have this constitutional problem. And that's why in the Nordin Saleh versus Dewan Undangan Negeri, Kelantan 1992 case, the court held that the Kelantan anti-defection law was unconstitutional. Personally, I'm not in agreement with the Nordin Saleh decision for the simple reason that in Article 10, Clause 1, Subclause C, the right to association is not absolute. The right to association is subject to such restrictions as Parliament deems necessary or expedient in the interest of the security of the Federation or any part thereof, public order or morality. So, right to associate or disassociate can be subjected to morality. In my humble submission, morality is not only conventional morality or sex morality. Morality also includes political morality. So I think an anti-defection law could well be passed under Article, and it will not violate Article 10(1)(c) because there is permission to pass a law on the ground of morality. However, we have this binding Nordin Saleh decision, so it does create this problem. The law is what the judges say it is, not what the Constitution says it is, but what the judges say the Constitution says. As Oliver Wendell Holmes, the great American jurist, later on judge, said, the prophecies are what the courts will do in fact, and nothing more pretentious are what I mean by the law. So the law is defined by judicial decisions. Okay, how can we compromise? I think a compromise solution is that defectors should have the right to switch parties. If, for example, their party has become corrupt or their party is adopting policies and platforms that the member cannot stomach anymore because of his conscience, he has to take a stand. So people should be allowed to switch parties, but they must return to the electorate at a by-election. They must now go back to the electorate and say, thank you for electing me on this party ticket with this platform, but now I'm beseeching you, I'm begging you to support me again on a different platform. A modification of this proposal that I made just now is that perhaps there should be no automatic vacating of the seat, no automatic vacancy, but the electors in the area, in the constituency, should be allowed to demand a recall election. So if I was elected in a constituency and I have resigned from my party, the electors in my constituency, with let us say 20% of the electors signing a petition, demand that there should be a recall election. So that may be a compromise solution. Okay, next one. Independent legislature versus a captive parliament. The executive in the US cannot take Congress for granted on anything, whether lawmaking or financial proposals. Those of you who are familiar with the American Constitution will know that crippling delays and disagreements between the two, between the president and the Congress, are very common. And sometimes these delays or defeats are not because of principles, but purely because of politics. For example, in October 1990, the Bush government was temporarily paralyzed because of the failure to secure the passage of the budget through the Congress. He couldn't pass the budget. I'm sure you're aware that Obama was trying to pass a health care bill, an admirable effort to cover more people with the state aid. But the Congress opposed it. And so ultimately the bill that came out was a very, very diluted type of healthcare bill. However, in Malaysia and the British system, legislative cooperation between the executive and the legislature is assured. This is a very positive thing. It ensures strong and effective government. The government can push bills through. But there is a darker side. There is always a darker side to everything. The darker side is that in parliamentary systems, the executive dominates the fiscal and the legislative agenda to such an extent that many commentators suggest that Parliament legitimates, it does not legislate. Lawmaking has, for all practical purposes, shifted to the bureaucracy, to the executive. Executive actually is not the minister so much, it's the bureaucracy. They draft the bill, then they give instructions to MPs to support the bill. They determine when the bill will be introduced. And I don't have the time for this, Anas, but actually the parliamentary practice in Malaysia needs to be reformed. Sometimes a copy of the bill is given to MPs 1 day or 2 days in advance. The bill is chopped with the words sulit, tarhad, etc. So there is secrecy surrounding bills. Basically, MPs are to be regarded as rubber stamps. So this is the darker side of parliamentary democracy. Okay, please, next one. The American president dissolution of legislature. This is a beautiful provision in the USA. American president cannot dissolve the houses of Congress even in times of war. In Malaysia, however, the Constitution in Article 55, Clause 2 permits the Prime Minister to advise the Yang di-Pertuan to dissolve Parliament prematurely. Almost every election since 1959, 59 was the first election, every election has been premature. The government of the day chooses the most opportune time in terms of public opinion to call an election. Now, I know that when the Prime Minister advises premature dissolution, the King is not bound by this advice, though conventionally he almost always does not disregard it. He follows it. Okay, please, next one. The talent pool. Cabinet appointments in the US are from outside the Congress. And the president's talent pool is as broad as the nation. The president can choose his, they call secretaries of state or secretary of this, secretary of that. Actually, those are ministers. He can choose his ministers from Harvard University, Princeton University, anywhere he likes, from the banks. So President Nixon chose Henry Kissinger, a professor of political science at Harvard, to be his Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs. Actually, this is Secretary of State, but he was basically handling foreign policy. In parliamentary systems, on the other hand, all cabinet posts must be filled by MPs. The only flexibility is this: the PM can appoint a minister from the Senate. He can take a Rafida Aziz, a Ghazali Shafi'i, and put them in the Senate, and then appoint them to the cabinet. But there has to be a vacancy in the cabinet to be filled before the PM can do that. Because cabinet ministers are appointed, Senate members are appointed for a particular term, and they can be renewed 3 years times 2, and that's it. However, the Prime Minister can recruit distinguished outsiders by appointing them to the Senate. Yes, indeed. Okay, next one, please. Divided government in the US. In the US, a divided government is a distinct possibility. These are special words. Please don't let me confuse you. By divided, I don't mean that government members are fighting with each other. No. What I mean is this, that one party can control the White House.
Prof, on that, you're muted. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, try again. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So what I meant is this: one party can control the White House and another party can control the Congress. So that's a divided government. That's a distinct possibility. For instance, though Presidents Clinton and Obama were Democrats, both houses of Congress were for much of their tenure controlled by the opposition, the Republicans. Now, this scenario is impossible in a parliamentary system in which the government is the government because it enjoys the confidence of the lower house as a precondition of its accession to power. Next one. Unified executive in the USA, split executive in Malaysia. The American president is both head of government and head of state. The de jure head of state, legal, and the de facto head of government. But in our system, the prime minister is head of government and the Yang di-Pertuan is the head of the state. Now, the existence of a split executive is a potential safeguard against abuse of power by the political executive. It is. And once in a while, actually, there are clear instances of strong action by the head of the state to prevent the political executive from abusing its powers. But there is also, of course, the darker side. The darker side is that sometimes conflicts can occur. Next one. In Commonwealth countries, sometimes there have been problems. Prime Minister Whitlam was dismissed as Prime Minister by Governor General Sir John Kerr in Australia. Why? Whitlam had a majority in the lower house, but he did not have a majority in the Senate, and therefore the budget could not pass. And because the budget could not be passed, the country in some respect was in a crisis. Civil servants, police, army cannot be paid. There is no legal authority to pay. So Sir John Kerr invited Whitlam and said, why don't you call an election and let the people resolve the issue? Whitlam refused. Governor General dismissed him. A very controversial decision because Whitlam and his party had a majority in the lower house, but because he was unable to pass the budget. In Pakistan, two prime ministers, Benazir and Nawaz Sharif, were dismissed because of corruption or abuse of power by the Pakistani president. In Malaysia, the refusal by the Yang di-Pertuan to assent to the Constitution Amendment Bill of 1983 triggered a constitutional crisis that took several months to resolve. In August 1983, the king said no to a bill proposed by the Yang di-Pertuan. From August to September, October, November, December, there was a constitutional crisis. No constitutional amendments, other constitutional clauses in the amendment could not be passed because of this crisis. And as you all know, in September 2020, the Yang di-Pertuan refused the PM's request for a proclamation of emergency. In July 2021, there was another confrontation between the Istana and the cabinet over the alleged revocation of emergency ordinances by the cabinet unilaterally. So this split executive does cause conflicts now and then. Okay, next. Number of terms. This again is a very beautiful aspect of the American system. The US president is limited to 2 terms of 4 years each. Of course, he has to seek election after 4 years. In the Philippines, I think it is 7 years, just 1 term of 7 years. In parliamentary systems, on the other hand, there is no limit to the number of terms a prime minister may serve. Lee Kuan Yew served for nearly 3 decades. Tun Mahathir served nearly 2 decades. And then, of course, he came back again. Jawaharlal Nehru and Indira Gandhi of India, Margaret Thatcher of UK led their nation for 13 to 15 years. Now, such lengthy tenures provide continuity of leadership, but they also personalize power, and that's no good. I think there should be some limits on the number of terms a prime minister should be allowed to serve. Okay, next. Popularly elected chief executive in the US. The American president is elected by the entire nation. I know there is an electoral college, but basically the entire nation votes for him. So he may be from one state, but actually all the other 49 states, there are 50 states, all 50 states vote for him or against him. This is in contrast with the parliamentary system in which the prime minister is appointed by the Yang di-Pertuan is not popularly elected. The PM actually is only an MP from one constituency, that's all. But because he was chosen as the leader of the party or coalition that has the largest number of votes, therefore he's appointed as prime minister by the Yang di-Pertuan. So in many parliamentary democracies, the PM is not a national figure. He's unable actually to exercise the authority of his office effectively because he's not a national figure. Okay, next slide. By way of conclusion, what I wish to say is this, that the parliamentary system has one very positive feature, and that is that it produces strong and effective government if there is a majority. If there is no majority and there is a lot of party hopping, then we'll suffer the problems Malaysia has suffered the last 2 years. If the parliamentary executive has a stable majority in the lower house, legislative cooperation between government and parliament is assured. Another advantage is that a divided government, parliament controlled by one party, executive by another, is not possible in our system. Next. However, the great flaw of the parliamentary system is that the executive tends to capture the legislative process. Parliament becomes a rubber stamp. Though debates and motions allow MPs to have their say, in the end, the executive has its way. Despite the theory that Parliament is the grand inquest of the nation, the great inquiry, they ask questions. The reality is that a government once in power tends to control the legislature. Ministerial responsibility to Parliament, in theory, Article 43 says, all the cabinet shall be collectively responsible to Parliament. Beautiful. In reality, ministerial responsibility to Parliament is more nominal than real. Question time, some people say, is a ritual exercise in evasion. The last 2 years in Malaysia demonstrated a frightening control of our legislature by the executive. In 2020, Parliament sat for only 50 days, 50. In 2021, Parliament sat for only 2.5 days up to now. And when it sat on July 26, no debate was allowed. Only a briefing was done by the members of the cabinet. So this is a frightening facts actually that came out the last 2 years, how much Parliament can be controlled by the executive. Next. The talent pool for ministers is very small in our system, and therefore actually there is the problem of the cabinet often not having the necessary quality that is needed to provide for an efficient, workable and working government. The lack of an anti-defection law allows MPs to make a hobby of hopping. The executive has no security of tenure. Other defects are that due to the absence of proportional representation, there is no proportionality between votes won and the seats captured. I gave you the example earlier. There may be 3 candidates. One got 40% vote, one got 39%, one got 19%. But the 40% guy gets the seat. Sadly, this happens in 25% or so of the seats. That the winner did not get more than 50% of the vote. The result is that the ruling party may get 92% of the seats with only about 62% of the popular vote, or 46% of the popular vote, but 52% of the seats. I have got a lot of data on this, but actually quite a few times the disparity of the percentage of popular vote and the percentage of seats is very, very great. So the representative character of Parliament comes into question. Is Parliament really a representative institution? If there is no proportionality between votes obtained and the seats won. Okay, next. The American system has the great merit that it produces an effective check and balance between the president and the Congress. I just want to mention this to you. The American president seems to all of us to be the most powerful man on earth because he's got his finger on nuclear weapons, he's got the biggest army, so on and so forth. He's very powerful when it comes to bombing Iraq and threatening Iran and invading this and invading that. He's very powerful. But when it comes to dealing with the Congress, oh, he gets humbled and humiliated very, very often. So he's not as powerful within his country, though of course he's very powerful outside. In America, power checks power. The president cannot marginalize the Congress or dissolve it prematurely. Another plus point is that president has security of tenure. So this shameful episode of governments rising and falling and rising and falling, this doesn't occur in the USA. However, he's limited to 2 terms of 4 years each, which I think is good. And he's popularly elected. That's also good. Next one. I think that's the last slide. The great drawback is that the American system leads to constant clashes between the executive and the legislature. The delays, the stalemates, the gridlocks, the deadlocks often cripple the machinery of government and prevent necessary laws from being passed. I just want to ask you, just want to mention to you, 30,000 people a year die in the USA from gun violence. 30,000. And yet they are unable to pass an adequate law for gun control. The American Congress is so significantly controlled by lobbies, whether it is the Jewish lobby or the defense lobby or the banking lobby or the farmers lobby or the gun lobby. There are so many lobbies that critics allege that the United States government has metamorphosed, has transformed into a plutocracy. In other words, rule by the few over the many. Now, I know that this is so also in parliamentary systems where behind the scenes actors tend to control policies of the government. So this is sadly a problem of political science, a problem of democracy. The democracy, with all its good intentions, has actually been captured by undemocratic elements and suffers from many undemocratic tendencies. Last slide. All in all, both systems have their strengths and defects, of course. And which system should we choose? I'm not so sure. Ultimate factor is the quality of leadership. Good leaders can make systems work, even if the system has a defect. I want to end by saying systems are as good as the people who administer them. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much, Prof. By contrasting the parliamentary and the presidential system, it helps us see, like you say, the good and the bad of both sides. It make it easier for Malaysians to ponder a little bit more about our system. We cannot have the best of both worlds. we probably try to get the best of our world. Yeah, our world. I have organized the questions first that were sent to us, and if we have time, we'll take the question that is popping up right now at the at the chat room. Yeah, I'll do some the share now. Now, you have some commented some just now. Two person. In fact, there are a few others who also have some question, which is almost similar. Please comment on the current situation. Perhaps a quick, commentary.
Oh heavens!
Current situation, yeah, a quick one by Dr. Loganathan and Kaulishi.
Dr. Loga's question is as broad as the sky. Maybe I'm exaggerating. It's very broad. Current situation. Yeah. Well, maybe I'll narrow it down to say resignation of the PM. Yeah. So how do we handle that? Let me just point out to you, Dr. Loga, and all others who are interested, that the Constitution does not provide for everything. There are definite lacuna or gaps in the law. Basically, our Constitution nowhere uses the word interim, prime minister, caretaker, acting, provisional. There is no such provision. However, one could read into the Constitution constitutional conventions. Conventions are practices, informal rules of political practice, which are not law, but which are regarded as binding by those to whom they apply. Now, in our country, these conventions are rather weak because we are only 64 years old. And another factor is this, that the spirit of the Constitution, the letter of the Constitution has not yet been internalized. I know that some of you may not like this, but basically the constitutional patriotism, constitutional literacy is not there. So what's the situation? Now, do British conventions apply then? We don't have our own practices. Do British conventions apply? Yes, they can apply, but don't forget that Britain has no written constitution, whereas we have a written constitution, so we cannot apply lock, stock and barrel the British conventions. Now, how should the king act if there is a resignation? Right away, let me say this to you, that the king cannot rule the country on his own. We are a constitutional monarchy. The king cannot say, all right, the prime minister has resigned. I'll take my time to find out who controls the house. In the meantime, I will issue the orders. The king cannot do that because we are a constitutional monarchy. However, what are his choices? I'm afraid the choices will depend on a number of factors. Number one, is Parliament in session? If Parliament is in session, his job is easy. He puts the matter to Parliament and says, let there be a vote of confidence on the floor. And if the person has a vote of confidence, the king can then appoint him as the prime minister. But if Parliament is not in session, as it is not today, Parliament was prorogued and it has not been brought back to session as yet. By the way, the July 27th was also a prorogation. So they prorogued till September. So what's the role of the king if the PM resigns if Parliament is not in session? I will only mention to you a number of possibilities. There are no right answers, Mr. Loga, because, as I said, the Constitution is silent. One could be this: ask the Prime Minister who resigned to continue till the King can find out who to appoint. For example, in England, Theresa May in 2019 resigned because her attempts again and again over Brexit failed, and her own party turned against her. So she resigned. For 7 weeks, the Queen let her continue till Boris Johnson was appointed. The Queen did not appoint an interim. The Queen let Theresa May, who had resigned, continue. So that's one possibility. But in Malaysia, there's a little bit of a problem, Mr. Loga. Article 43, Clause 4 clearly says, and the Amir Kahar case also says, once a Prime Minister loses the confidence, and the resignation in Malaysia was as a result of losing the confidence of a substantial section of his supporters. Once the Prime Minister loses confidence, Article 43, Clause 4 kicks in. 43, Clause 4 says there are only two choices: resign or advise dissolution. And Amir Kahar case says once the PM resigns, all cabinet ministers are automatically also have resigned. So I think in Malaysia, this practice of Theresa May and Boris Johnson may not entirely be applicable. A second choice to the King could be, again, a British convention. Give the leader of the opposition a chance to form the government. If the leader of one party has resigned, given opportunity to the leader of the opposition. Please do bear in mind, I'm talking of this leader losing confidence. He resigned because of lack of confidence, not because of sickness, or not because of death, or not because of some other factor. He lost confidence. In such a situation in England, the second practice would be give a chance to the leader of the opposition. Now, a third possibility could be this: appoint an interim. That's what the King has done. In the meantime, try to apply Article 43, Clause 2A, which says that the Prime Minister shall belong to the Dewan Rayat. He shall be a person who, in the King's judgment, that's the word used, it doesn't say discretion, in the King's judgment, is likely to command the confidence of the members of the House of Representatives. So appoint an interim. That interim holds the fort till the King is satisfied that someone is likely to command the confidence. So I think that's what the King is doing. He's going through great effort to discover who's likely to command, because I think he did the same thing in 2020, and he later on found out that the statutory declarations were not so reliable. Some people declared something in the morning and declared something else. The moment they left the palace, they declared something else. So I think the King is going through a multiple process. First of all, he invited all the leaders of the parties, asked them what's their view of the situation. He's not bound by their advice, of course. He's basically consulting with them. Then the second thing that he has done is he had asked all the MPs to give him statutory declaration. A third step that I understand he's going to take is this, that he is asking all the 114 who are supporting the UMNO leader, he's asking them to come and see him face to face and to indicate whether they signed the statutory declaration voluntarily or under duress. And I won't be surprised if he goes into the fourth procedure also, and that is he will ask the appointed PM to summon Parliament as soon as possible and get a vote of confidence there. So I think that's the position today. Our constitution is silent, and so conventions with some variations apply.
Thank you, Prof. Yeah.
Thank you.
Let me share the next question. The next question.
Anas, you muted.
All right, I think just now there was. I think now it's okay. Then. Okay, the next question. Yeah, the next question says, what is the constitutional definition of parliamentary majority? Is it 112, or is it a person from a party with the highest votes? I think this question is with regards to minority government. Perhaps a comment?
Yelini, no, let me answer it. The first line. Is it 112? No, it's the words of the Constitution are a majority of the members of the House. Now, at the moment, there are only 220 members. So majority would be, in my view, 110 plus 1, 111. But the actual membership of the Dewan Rakyat actually is 222. But there are 2 vacancies due to deaths. So it's majority of the members. You'll notice it is an absolute majority, not a simple majority of those present and voting. Absolute means of the total membership. So absolute majority of the total membership today will be 110 plus 1. Thank you.
All right. The next question is a bit long, lengthy, but I think it's good because it is also about the state. Can PM be appointed from non-Malays, female, youth, and non-Muslim? Constitutional provision seems silent about. Some conservatives argue that by virtue of constitutional conventions, although it is not binding, the appointment of PM from 3M, male, Muslim, and Malay, must be continued and followed upon by all political actors, because if not, it will make constitution difficult to enforce, and most citizens, mostly from Malays, would not like it. In addition, in some states' constitution, MB must be a Malay and Muslim, and this follow that it requires the same as the federal level. Maybe so you can comment. However, can this constitutional convention also override the requirement of no discrimination on the ground raised under Article 8(2)? What is your opinion in this regard? Muhammad Nur Haqif.
Nur Haqif, this belief that there is such a convention, it'll be questioned by many. Where does it say there is such a convention? Oh. There is no such convention. I will not be surprised if in 10 years' time there is a prime minister from Sabah Sarawak. Don't forget, Sabah Sarawak contribute 60% of this nation's territory. Together, the 2 states of Sabah Sarawak are bigger than the whole of West Malaysia. On the question of, this is not a question of law, this is a question of politics. But whether politics will ever throw up a non-Malay or a Sabah Sarawakian, I think that's a matter of politics. But legally, there can be no bar. Article 8 will definitely apply. By the way, a convention cannot override the Constitution. Even if there is such a convention in your mind, I am sorry to inform you, please purge yourself of this convention, because the convention cannot override the Perlembagaan Persekutuan Article 8. Now, your point about the states is, however, very good. Because it's in the states, therefore it makes sense to have it at the federal level itself. The states, to the best of my knowledge, also say, unless the Sultan permits. I have a copy of the state constitutions. That big brown volume up there is the state constitution. All the states, all the 9 Malay states say, by the way, there is no such provision in Malacca. There's no provision in Penang or Sabah Sarawak. It's only in the 9 Malay states. But in the 9 Malay states, the Sultan has the discretion to suspend this rule. So I personally am in no position to agree with you on this. I will just say this. Politics may one day throw up. Don't forget, Sabah Sarawak have 56 MPs in the Dewan Rayat. 56 is 50% of 112. Isn't it? 112 is that magic number to form the government. 56 is full 50%. If these 56 unite and say, if you want our support, that's the precondition. I think it may work out. Look in the USA, the blacks, what small percentage they have, and yet you had a Barack Obama elected as the president of the USA. We have to think. We have to think more broadly. I think these attitudes were okay in times past, but I think you have to think more broadly, and especially your view about your question about women. That will be very hotly contested in so many other Muslim countries, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia. The leaders have been, Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in the world. Leaders have been women. So I think this kind of argument sort of echoes the morality of the past. It doesn't echo the morality of contemporary world. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to the next question. When you look at the current situation, what is more important, parliamentary democracy or order and stability?
Good, yeah. That's a good question.
Yeah.
But I'm afraid our first attempt should be to achieve order and stability within the law. Within the law. Because if the Constitution can be violated by you for a good cause, then don't forget, it can also be violated by others for some other cause. I think we should obey the Constitution, though I fully acknowledge that constitutional jurisprudence does know of revolutions. There are military coups d'etats. Our neighboring countries, Indonesia, Thailand, yes, Fiji, so often, Myanmar have had revolutions, Bangladesh has had problems, Pakistan, but I would not want to say order and stability is to override the Constitution. I think we should have both. There was order and stability in this country for a long time. We were regarded as a sterling example of a country where there can be a balance between democracy and strong government, between democracy and prosperity. I think we were doing well. We are going through a difficult period, but I don't think this requires us to jettison, to just suspend our parlembagan in order to achieve stability. Every dictator says the same thing, you know. He took power because he wanted to restore stability.
Thank you. What immediate remedies are available to the Rakyat if the caretaker Prime Minister in any way fails to discharge his duties, administering the country or conducts political malfeasance in his capacity? Philip Yeo,
Well, immediate remedies will have to, the word remedy will have to include political remedies, I suppose, criticism, organization of NGOs, political pressure. I'll answer that in 2 words. Political pressure. Ultimate remedy would be at the next election. But I won't recommend a remedy of revolution or or breach of order. No, I think we have to stand up and be counted. And I think governments that subscribe to elections do listen to the people. They have to listen. They have to, because otherwise they won't get the vote. The important thing is that the message that we deliver must be delivered in a way that is politically acceptable to a wide section of the population. If the message is in very strong language, very extreme sentiments, people will reject it. So we have to be diplomatic in our messages, and we have to be persistent. I think it will have an effect.
Thank you, bro. The next question has appeared before, but I guess looking at even social media, this has been popping up quite a few times. So maybe a good chance for us to reiterate the answer. Legally, to what extent Yang di-Pertuan Agong may act outside PM's advice?
If you are talking all in all, the Yang di-Pertuan Agong under Article 40, Clause 1 and under Article 40, Clause 1A is bound by the advice of the Cabinet and the Prime Minister. However, Article 40, Clause 2 gives to him discretion in 3 specified areas. Number 1, appointment of PM. Number 2, dissolution of the Dewan Rayat. Number 3, convening of the Majlis Raja Raja. And in 40 Clause 2A itself, there are these words, Anas, and in any other case mentioned in this constitution. There are many other cases. For example, the Yang di-Pertuan Agong can delay a bill by 30 days under Article 66, Clause 4A. The Yang di-Pertuan Agong can, in the appointment of JPA, Public Service Commission, in the appointment of the Education Service Commission, in the appointment of the governors of the states, Agong can act in his discretion. The word used is in his discretion. These are clear-cut areas where discretion applies. Now, there is also in constitutional theory a mysterious and not so clearly defined area called reserve powers. In other words, these are not mentioned. These are prerogatives. And there are some such areas which cannot be denied, which just cannot be denied. Let me give an example. Prime Minister calls an election. The Agong agrees. So Parliament is dissolved. Now, I want to ask you, if Parliament is dissolved, what happens to the PM? The PM is a person who, in the opinion or who, in the judgment of the king, commands the confidence of the lower house. But there's no more lower house. There's no more lower house. So during the dissolution of the Dewan Rayat, the constitution is a little bit silent. However, Article 40 Clause 2A does mention towards the end that if a prime minister is appointed when Parliament is under dissolution, then it should be someone who was an MP in the former assembly. Now, obviously, the king will have some discretion here. There are other areas where probably discretion exists, but these are untested. I'll just give one example. It is untested, but I will give this example. The example is this. Let us say the king is presented with a bill that the Prime Minister passed through Parliament. He got the necessary 2/3 majority to amend the Parlembagaan. I'm just giving a hypothetical example. Let us say the Prime Minister and Parliament want to amend the rights of the Malay rulers. Under Article 159, Clause 5, and Article 38, the consent of the Majlis Raja Raja must be obtained.
Yeah.
Now, the Constitution is delightfully silent whether the consent must be obtained before the king signs or after the king signs. So the PM goes and says, Tuanku, we have passed this bill with the 2/3. We are determined to push this bill through. Kindly sign. Can the king say, why AB? First, send it to the Majlis Raja Raja. Get their consent first, then I will sign. Now, I don't know the answer. All that I know is in 1983, that's what happened. Sultana Pahang was the young di Pertuan Agong. The Prime Minister wanted to amend the Constitution so that the king can be bypassed after 15 days. At that time, it was 15 days.
Yes.
After 15 days, he can be bypassed. The Sultana Pahang, as the young di Pertuan Agong, refused. And there was a crisis from August to September, October, November, December, crisis of 4 months. So I think there are areas, in answer to your question, a constitution will always throw up new areas. And I very much like what our late Sultan Azlan Shah said in an article. He said, a king is a king, whether constitutional or absolutist. You cannot describe his powers and functions entirely by reference to the Constitution. So there will always be some reserve powers. In England, they say prerogatives.
Prerogatives, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, yeah. The next question is, what you call that? Now it's very, very popular comments in the social media. Can Agong pick a new PM from the previous failed cabinet? Yeah, Balim Kesi. And this is very much debated in the social media.
Yeah. In fact, not just a previous failed cabinet, Agong can take the previous failed Prime Minister.
Right. Yeah.
If on the floor of the House, he is resurrected, the House, the equations have changed. I'm afraid that is possible. I can't deny that.
Yeah. Next question. Yeah. What can we do when our elected representatives betray their voters after elections?
Mary, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Mary knows the answer. She's
Yes, I know, she's just being naughty.
throwing it for the benefit of the others.
The rest,
She
yes,
knows the
yes.
answer better than I do. I know her personally. She was a very good lecturer. And Mary, I would not recommend that we withdraw from politics, that we sit at home, that we don't vote. I think our duty then is to become social activists. I think our duty is to raise our voice of concern, but peacefully, write in, make the necessary, use the necessary media to express our views, form NGOs, write to the MPs, write to the Prime Minister. I personally think that though their public posture may be defiance, they may defy, they may act, say, shut up, we are the government, you're not the government. I know this used to happen many years ago. Someone says something and the PM says, Hello, don't talk too much. If you want to talk like that, join a political party. The Bar Council says anything, they say, you don't talk too much. You're not a political party. But actually, they do listen.
Yeah.
They do listen. On the quiet, they are concerned. They do listen. Though the public appearance is one of defiance and to dismiss you. But on the quiet, they'll have a meeting. And they will say, now, what can we do to diffuse this situation? I have seen, Mary, I have seen in my lifetime number of movements arise, which actually in their inception were regarded with great disdain. In the 70s, consumer movement was regarded with disdain by the government. Oh, they're anti-business. They're anti-development. The environmental group is anti-development. The Bar Council is a subversive organization. Burse, when it began, we all know what reputation it was assigned, but Burse kept on, and actually Burse ultimately made an impact. So I think that would be my advice. Don't withdraw from politics. Instead, actually strategize, put your opinions together, form small groups, and try to influence public opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this is a question about democracy in Malaysia beyond the mere voting general election. Perhaps a comment here.
Of course, of course. I mean, I would say democracy everywhere is not simply voting once in 5 years. Democracy actually is active participation, not only in political affairs, active participation in civic affairs. I think democracy requires active participation by the citizens in all affairs of the state, and to be the ears of the government, and to advise the government on everything that needs to be improved. Voting every 5 years is actually a very small part of democracy, because I believe democracy is not something only in parliament. Unless democracy should also exist at home. Democracy should exist in the classroom. It should exist in your club, in your football association. All associations, all organizations, all behavior must be dictated by this belief that discussion before decision is the sine qua non, the basic premise of democracy. So I think in our whole life, that's the way we should behave. To me, that's democracy. Democracy is not simply elections every 5 years.
Thank you. Next question would be, many have been asking, what can be done to rectify party hopping culture? Peter Leong, yeah?
Yeah, actually, I did try to answer this. I gave two possible suggestions.
Yeah.
One was that there should be a law which says, if you hop, your seat is vacant, you have to go back to the Raya to seek re-election. That's one possibility. A milder possibility is that there is no automatic vacancy, but the voters in the area may say, I don't like what you did. You breached your trust. You misrepresented. And there should be a recall election.
Right. Now I will take some questions from the chat. Yeah. The first, I'll try with the first person that came in at 8:36. The question: since law is a judicial decision, how can we prevent the courts from making unbiased and making biased and unethical judgment?
Courts.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, that's slightly outside the topic today.
Yeah.
No, you cannot prevent the courts from making biased judgments, partly because actually it may not be biased. It's your opinion.
Yeah.
What is biased is a subjective issue. But I concede all of us, myself included, of course, We are all encapsulated. ENCAP SULE, encapsulated. Capsulated by time, by territory, by religion, race, gender. I ask Anas, what time is it? And Anas will say 9:25 p.m. Hello, it's 9:25 a.m. in New York City, Anas, isn't it? No? I ask you, what's the date today? You'll say 19th of August. Excuse me, 19th of August? Not according to the Islamic calendar, not according to the Chinese or the Hindu calendar. We are all encapsulated. We are all frogs under a coconut shell. We are all. And it takes a whole lifetime actually to break through these limitations, partially only. The safeguards, however, are this. First of all, court proceedings must be open to the public, should not be secret. Secondly, lawyers should be allowed on both sides. Thirdly, written judgments must be given. They must be published. They should be open to scrutiny by commentators. Fourthly, a right of appeal. And as you appeal, at the High Court, it may be 1. Appeal is 3. Federal Court may be 5 or 7 or 9. So these are some of the safeguards. But an absolutely impartial judgment may not even be impartial, totally objective judgment may not be entirely desirable either. And I know some of you will say this is nonsense. You see, some judgments may be legally sound, economically disastrous, consequentially disastrous. So should the judge give a decision that will cause massive disaster in that area of law? Or should he interpret the law creatively? The moment he interprets the law creatively, people will say, see, he's biased. He's so biased that he added colors to the legal canvas. So I think there is no safeguard to judicial activism, to judicial creativity, to the judge trying to do the best to the case in front of him. But of course, there should be safeguards. And that's why actually sometimes a judge makes a decision today, 10 years down the road, or maybe even earlier, it gets overruled. So who is impartial? That judge or the judge is 10 years later? We don't know. We don't know. But I share your concern for impartiality. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, and obviously, very important, obviously, an impartial judgment is better possible if the judiciary is inclusive of race, inclusive of religion, gender, region, economic, and other backgrounds. I think that's very important too. Okay.
All right. The next question, I think it's more contemporary now. It's hot today. Can an MP who is not the leader of his party be appointed the Prime Minister by the Yang di-Pertuan Agong? I think now this question is very much what's happening right now. Can an MP who is not the leader of his party be appointed the Prime Minister by Yang di-Pertuan Agong?
Yeah. By the way, in many countries,
it's like that.
Leaders of the parties are almost never appointed as prime ministers. Prime minister is someone else. In India, for example, you can be leader of the Congress party, but not the prime minister. So there is, the issue is leadership of the party is one thing, and the choice of the majority for the prime minister's post, I think, are two different things. The answer to your question is yes, but coming to Malaysia, in Malaysia, obviously, this is not so. Up to now, the leader of the party, leader of UMNO has always been the Prime Minister, and then during 2018 election, the leader of that faction was appointed as the PM. In situations where the leader of the party has a clear majority in parliament, the king has no choice. But if it is a hung parliament, nobody has a majority, or the party is deeply, deeply divided, the party is fractured, like UMNO was till about a few days ago. Party was deeply fractured, factionalism. This happens very often. And then the king may choose a senior member of the party who is less polarizing, who's able to bring the party together. And I want to mention this to you. In Australian states, sometimes what has happened is that one party won the election, but could not agree on who the prime minister candidate will be. And there actually the governor then of the state had to exercise discretion on a sort of a compromise candidate. So it can happen, but normally it doesn't happen. Thank you.
Next one, just a few more before we Prof, is it possible that Malaysia form a unity government in the current political stage? These are questions that have been popping out in the social media, Prof.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Actually, unity government is what we need right now. A government that tackles the economic crisis, the health crisis, the political crisis of credibility, of trust. That's what we need today. The main problem is this, the initiative for the unity government must come from the politicians themselves.
Yes.
They must come together. If the Yang di Pertuan Agong calls all the party leaders and says, I'm fed up with you all, I want you all to come together and form a coalition government or a unity government till 2023, and no hopping, that would drag the Yang di Pertuan Agong into politics. And that is not desirable. In some circumstances, he may have to do it, but it's not ideal for the Agong. So, in answer to your question, I think unity government is what this nation needs. But I think the initiative must come from the politicians themselves, who should sacrifice their political interests. Something too much to ask, I know.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, they should sacrifice their political interest and think of the nation, at least for a temporary period till the next election.
All right, I think I give this the final one. In exercising his discretion, does the Yang di Pertuan Agong take into account public opinion? And how does public opinion formally reach the Yang di Pertuan Agong?
I don't know which discretion, which particular power you are exercising, you are talking about. I would think, with all due respect to public opinion, I would think public opinion is irrelevant in the exercise of the Prime Minister, in the exercise of the appointment of the Prime Minister. The Perlembagaan is clear that the person appointed as PM should be one who, in the judgment of the Agong, commands the confidence of the members of the House. Now, if someone commands the confidence of the members of the House, whether he's popular with the public or not, I don't think that's relevant. So public opinion, I know many people say government of the people, for the people, by the people. I've always been amused by such statements. There is no such thing. It's not a government of the people, for the people, by the people. It's a government of the elite, for the elite, by the elite. And that's the way it is in every country of the world. So I think the Agong cannot take note of public opinion in the choice of the Prime Minister. In fact, the Agong cannot even take note of the electoral vote. So let us say X candidate and his party got more popular vote. Y candidate got less popular vote, but more seats. It's the seats that matter. It's the seats that matter. It's not the vote that matters. So with a heavy heart, I have to say, no, I'm afraid the Agong cannot take note of views from the public. He can consult with everyone. He can get expert opinion, but he's not allowed to make decision just simply because the public says so.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you very much for another interesting session, Prof. And look forward for more. Yes, yeah, and thank you for joining us. As you know,
Thank you very much.
just quickly, in 2 weeks' time, we will have lessons from our general elections by Dr. Chandra, 2nd September. Yeah, I hope all of you will join us. For today, let's give Prof. Shad a big hand. Everybody, if you can clap or just show your thumbs up, using the...
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Assalamualaikum, salam sejahtera.
Thank you.
Until the next time, see you guys again.
Thank you.
Yes, you can write in and say thank you to Prof. Yeah,
Thank you.
the chat. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
To Prof.